All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of Media Smarts, welcome to our inaugural Researching Digital Media Literacy in Canada event. My name is Cara Brisson-Boyven. I am the Director of Research here at Media Smarts. We are Canada's not-for-profit Centre for Digital and Media Literacy. Our offices are located on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. And we thank you so much for taking part today in what is part of our 16th annual Media Literacy Week. We hope that you've enjoyed many of the events of the week, and we invite you to some of the other events that we're hosting over the course of this week, including an event tonight at 7 p.m. in partnership with the Walrus titled Our Digital Lives. This will examine how the pandemic has changed how we engage with media, speaking about things like our online resilience and our online well-being. So if you're interested in that, we encourage you to attend. You can stick around after this session and we'll help you get the links and the registration links for those. They might also end up in the chat here momentarily, so you can find those links for tonight's event as well. Media Smarts has been supporting Canadians with information and tools so they can develop critical thinking skills and critical and digital literacy skills for 25 years now. Our vision is that Canadians have the critical skills to engage with media as active and informed digital citizens. And we achieve this through education, public awareness, policy work, and of course, research. At Media Smarts, our educational resources, public awareness campaigns, and policy recommendations are grounded in the best available evidence pertaining to media and digital literacy. In collaboration and consultation with various partners, our research team specializes in designing and facilitating both qualitative and quantitative research studies and conducting robust evaluations of all of our digital and media literacy programs and resources. Our research is also taken up by academics across Canada and internationally to support and inform other media and digital literacy research projects. Our longest running research project, Young Canadians in a Wireless World, is the largest and most comprehensive study of how children and youth use the internet and digital technology in Canada. Phase 1 of this project began in 2000, and we are currently working on phase 4. In addition to our Young Canadians research, we lead research projects on a wide range of digital literacy issues, including online privacy and consent, algorithmic literacy, online harms and online hate, the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, digital well-being and collective online resilience, digital equity and the digital divide, digital media literacy, and digital citizenship. Most of our research projects involve working with children and youth from diverse communities across Canada. We focus on designing projects that create safe spaces for young people to share their thoughts and experiences, their concerns and solutions about various digital and media literacy issues. Beyond participating in focus groups, interviews, or surveys, we aim to empower young Canadians through the research process. So providing them with knowledge and skills that they can then take forward with them as they continue to navigate the online world and digital technologies. We appreciate the time that our participants take to engage in our projects, and the research team is always looking for ways to collaborate with youth and acknowledge them as experts. Our research informs policy development in both the public and private sectors. We mobilize our findings and recommendations from our research and evaluation projects in many ways, including through research reports, white papers, blog posts, op-eds, public consultations, testifying before parliamentary committees, conference presentations, media interviews, podcasts, infographics, and social media. Research at Media Smarts would not be possible without community members and organizations who guide and support our work and call on our expertise to return the favor. We sit on many advisory committees for other research projects across Canada, and we are always looking for new opportunities to collaborate with others, especially in the digital and media literacy field. It is my pleasure to introduce to you now the chair of today's panel discussion, Ramona Pringle. Ramona is an associate professor in the RTA School of Media at X University and director of the Creative Innovation Studio, a creative network comprised of multiple incubators and a unique digital studio devoted to fostering international co-productions using contemporary collaboration tools. As a writer, producer, researcher, and journalist, Ramona's work examines the evolving relationship between humans and technology. She is a technology analyst and columnist for CBC, where she tackles current affairs and explores the impact of technology and social media on all aspects of people's lives, from work to relationships. Ramona was the writer and director of the interactive documentary Avatar Secrets, the interactive producer of PBS Frontline's Digital Nation, and editor-in-chief of Our Digital Life, and has edited and guest edited several IEEE publications. Ramona's projects have been featured at festivals and conferences, including iDocs, Power to the Pixel, TFI Interactive, Hot Docs, Social Media Week, TEDx, and in publications including the New York Times, Mashable, and the Huffington Post. She is a member of the City of Toronto Film, Television, and Digital Media Board and the chair of Interactive Ontario's Emerging Talent Committee. We are thrilled to have Ramona here, along with the speaker she will soon introduce. I'm now going to pass the mic to Ramona, who will kick off our event for today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be joining everyone virtually. This is probably my favorite discussion to have. The goal today is to bring together some wonderful academics to talk about the work that they're doing, their own research in digital media literacy in Canada and processes. So we'll get us look into the work that they're doing right now, recent and current projects, as well as their approaches to studying key digital literacy issues, including digital equity and inclusion, the use of multimedia in the classroom, social media, big data analysis, and AI, artificial intelligence, and online privacy. So a lot of topics to be covering and different approaches to researching and studying those topics. We'll also hear from our panelists today on how they teach research methods and how that's evolving, as well as how they mentor early career researchers who are interested in this field and studying digital media literacy and the social impacts of technology. So I'm pleased to introduce the panelists today. Michelle Shiragerman is an associate professor of educational technologies in the Faculty of Education at the University of Ottawa. A former high school teacher, she now studies how children and teens learn to read, critically evaluate, and synthesize internet texts during research projects in school. She also studies issues of digital equity in rural and francophone schools in Ontario and media making as a way to support digital literacy learning through creative, culturally responsive classroom projects. She has used several methods to gather evidence of students' thinking and activities as they use digital tools, including screencasting, first-person video, glasses, and retrospective think-alouds. Ahmed Alrawi is an assistant professor in news, social media, and public communication at the School of Communication of Simon Fraser University, Canada. He's a founding member of the Media and Digital Literacy Academy of Beirut at the American University of Beirut, and is a research fellow at Erasmus University in the Netherlands. His publications mostly focus on social media, global communication, and news, and his research involves social media and big data analysis, social science, computational methods, and other traditional research methodologies. Jacqueline Burkell is the Associate Vice President of Research at Western University. She holds a PhD in psychology from Western and is an associate professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies. Jacky served as the faculty's assistant dean of research for 7 years and chaired the associate dean's research group from 2016 to 2018. A highly collaborative scholar, Jacqueline is a co-investigator on 2 SSHRC partnership grants, one examining artificial intelligence in the context of justice, the other focused on youth equality and privacy online. More broadly, her research focuses on the social impact of technology and examines how technological mediation changes social interaction and information behavior. So we've got quite a deck of experts today. And to get started, I think for context, what would be great to hear from everyone is a little bit about your current work and your recent work and research projects. So Michelle, maybe we can start with you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Ramona, for that lovely introduction. It is really nice to be here in conversation with you, with Ahmed, with Jacky, and with folks who've joined in today. I saw some familiar names, so thanks very much to colleagues from across the country who've joined in too. So for me, I'm a teacher, right? I'm a teacher educator, and I'm an educational researcher. And so my work is always situated at the intersections of teaching and technologies and literacy learning. And for the last couple of years, I've been working on 2 research projects mostly. So I'll just talk briefly about those. The first one, funded by a Shirk Insight grant, awarded to our incredible colleagues at Ontario Tech. I want to give them a shout out: Jeanette Hughes, Laura Morrison, Jennifer Robb, Jennifer Lapierre, to me also, and to Megan Cotton-Capel here at the University of Ottawa. This project examines the digital literacies that bi and multilingual children and children living in lower income communities in the province of Ontario are practicing through maker-oriented activities. So these are activities that invite children to use a range of both digital and physical materials and tools. And we're talking about everything from like 3D printers to sewing machines to recycled cardboard to make things. And those projects are framed, of course, by curriculum, but they're also driven by students' own interests, and they can involve information search, they can involve describing, what they've done or created in a digital text of some kind. It can involve video making, of course, as well. And we've used a range of methods to gather data in that study. Different types of interviews, as you mentioned, Ramona, in my introduction, interviews with students and teachers. We've used classroom observation, we've used surveys. And for one project, we did in fact capture students' first-person gaze as they were working with these digital and physical materials by asking them to wear spyglasses that have a little camera in the bridge. And so we have this data that really shows us as researchers what we can't often see, right? What students are actually working on. So that's one project. And then the other project, also funded by Shirk, it's an Insight Development grant to my colleague Megan Cotton-Capel and I, is really focused on digital equity. And in this work, we're interested in understanding the current nuances of digital access divides, digital skills divides, and also the divides of digital empowerment that may be at play, particularly for Francophone linguistic minority youth living here in the province of Ontario, and also students living in rural and remote communities across the province. So that's an interview base. We did some Zoom interviews with teachers, and I'm really deep in sort of qualitative analysis right now, focused on the insights of 13 rural educators and the kinds of things that they were grappling with in terms of digital access and digital skills teaching, even before COVID, but then certainly through kind of the early days of the pandemic. That's a bit about me.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Ahmed?
Thank you, Romana, for the introduction. And again, I would like to thank Media Smarts for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here with Michelle, Jacqueline, and everyone here. My research could be summed up by asking a few questions, like my main research questions that guide my trajectory would be, who are the bad actors on social media? How can we identify these bad actors? What are the strategies that they follow in disseminating their information? So based on that, I looked at different types of bad actors, including, for example, drug dealers and how they sell drugs on social media like Instagram or Facebook. I looked at terrorists and how, for example, they spread their messages. More recently, I'm running a project looking at the far right in Canada and the way they are exploiting the affordances of social media and disseminating conspiracy theories, especially targeting minority groups, and also casting doubt about the pandemic. And in general, I run the disinformation project, which entails different aspects. We looked at the content of the bad actors, so including, for example, state-run trolls and how they targeted Canada. And we found evidence, for example, that the Iranian trolls interfered in our election in 2015. The Russians kept on trying to interfere and influence our election. More recently, the Saudis trying to spread disinformation about human rights activists living in Canada, and so on. So just in a nutshell, my research is mixed method. So I use qualitative and quantitative, but sometimes involving big data. And this is one of the challenges I would like to talk about today, because it's really not easy to explore large data sets and then trying to make sense of all of that. Yeah, I hope I summed up probably what I've been doing. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a great summary and makes me want to just hear what you want to get into next. Jacky.
I forgot I had to unmute myself. Okay. Hi, I'm Jacqueline Burkell. As Ramona said, I'm Associate Vice President Research at Western, but I'm also a researcher and have been for many years in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies. So my background is actually cognitive psychology, but when I came into information and media studies, I started working much more in the area of communications. I am a multi-method researcher, so although my roots are in quantitative experimental research, I also do large, not huge, but large-scale data analysis. I do and have been increasing the amount of qualitative research that I do. And I actually work with some interesting methods that kind of sit at the intersection that use quantitative approaches to qualitative analysis, which I'm finding very interesting right now. I have for many years been interested in issues of the social impact of technology. And really, I started that and I still remain quite rooted in questions of privacy and autonomy, because I am actually concerned about both. I think that the data collection and analysis and the use of those analyses, those practices are changing our abilities to be self-defining. And I thought about this, and many people have, in relation to the election, for example. I think it's interesting for us to know that international actors are absolutely interfering with our elections, but in fact, we're also getting an awful lot of targeted information from parties, from actors who are within our own country and who we wouldn't think of as being malicious in any sense, but we know pretty conclusively that those actions are in fact constraining choices, maybe unconsciously constraining choices. But what I want to talk about a little bit more today is, so I'm involved in two big SHIRK partnership grants. One's looking at AI in the justice sector, where I'm doing work on the ethical and social implications. And the other is a longstanding collaboration with Val Steeves, who's done a lot of work with Media Smarts, and Jane Bailey, and others on the Equality Project, which looks at youth and online equality, and particularly in my case, focusing on again data collection practices. In the context of all of that work, I've become quite interested in the ways in which researchers are using information that's available online, and I'm particularly focused on our harvesting of social media productions and our qualitative analysis of those. And I'm, counter to how most of us would be looking at it, what I've become concerned about actually are the ethical issues associated with this that we were initially quite blind to, that are being picked up more and more in research ethics guidelines. But the reality is that we as researchers are going in and harvesting information that might be considered sensitive, in some cases might be considered private. We have very little idea how to contact the participants, and I use that term in quotes, of this research. The act of gaining consent from them will in some cases disrupt what are very important social venues and social interactions for people. So that isn't an out for us. And I think we need to wrestle very hard with, when is it okay for us to do this? And when do we have to curb our own practices, even if we think we can learn something very interesting by going in and taking what at first glance might appear just to be available to us right now.
Yeah, that's so interesting. In my own work, one of the things that I talk about so often is just there's the interplay of form and content and process, and all of them are digital and all of them are evolving. And this is what I'm hearing from all of you really, is that, and this is my next question, has to do with how things have changed over the past several years, how research in digital media has changed and continues to evolve. And I think it is especially unique because of that interplay of form and content and process. And all of those are constantly changing as new platforms come about, as we learn more about ethical blind spots we may have had before, Jacky. So this would be the next thing that I want to hear from all of you, being deeply immersed in these studies, is how it's been changing. in recent years. So Ahmed, maybe you can kick this one off for us.
Sure. I mean, I had a look at previous studies that covered media literacy in Canada, and I found that there has been an emphasis on studying the impact of video gaming on children or on teens. The other aspect, especially if you go back in time, will be violence on TV and how it affects people in general. I mean, it makes sense because that was the time when there was a lot of discussion and public concern about could video games, for example, make mass murderers or killers. It was just like there was a lot of, I can assure you, there was a lot of moral panic about the impact of media on people. And we still see it. We still see it in different ways. As for today, I think the emphasis is mostly on disinformation and misinformation happening even before COVID-19. Mostly, you know, when the 2016 US election occurred, there was a great deal of discussion about fake news and its impact on everything, actually, on reality and how we perceive it. So today, I think this is the kind of change that we are seeing, that there is more a tendency to talk about misinformation and the consequences of consuming it. In my mind, I think today we need in Canada a new generation of fact checkers. That's what we need to develop. And that's, I think, the job of everyone here, educators, media smarts, all of us. We need people to understand what is factual and what is not. Because if the lines are blurred between the two, we will be all in trouble. We will not really vote for the right people. We will not really follow the right public health directions, and we will be all in trouble. That's probably, that's probably will lead to chaos. The other issue I found in the past was the emphasis on studying teens and children. Most of the studies I was surprised to see that, well, that's what they focused on, parenting teens and children, which is great, by the way, because that's a vulnerable group. But what I think is also needed, probably emphasis on even adults and elderly people, because I have seen evidence that a lot of elderly people today are actually spreading misinformation about the pandemic. Because some of them don't know what is happening and they don't know how to fact check. But so that's what I'm arguing about, is probably we need more education for different segments, not necessarily focusing on the teens and children. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And Jacky? I will also note, Michelle had to step out. If anyone notices that we went from 4 to 3, there's a fire alarm in her building. I had tech issues behind the scene. These are the things we never, we never see. Anyway, Jacky, over to you.
Okay. So I think, how has it changed over the past few years? I think we have a greater and greater emphasis. I think actually the point about us needing to pay attention to populations other than youth is really important. But I also think we really need to pay attention to youth because, of course, they're going to trace up through all stages. And I think we have come to a greater and greater understanding of and awareness of and sensitivity to the fact that youth today, okay, let's say that it's the truism, but they're living in a world that is very, very, very different from the one in which most of us grew up in. And that's always going to be true. Generationally, I think that's always true. But what we need to think about in the context of digital literacy, in the context of media literacy research and media research in general, is that technologies are interwoven into the lives of youth now and will continue to be a part of their lives. And they're inextricable. You know, there was the disconnection challenge is an interesting idea, right? But kids can't. Like, we need to get this. It isn't a choice. It's not an option. It's not, well, it would be. No, in my case, so I ride a bike, and I ride a bike by choice. I don't commute using a car, and I look at my son, and he doesn't. And I think, you could ride a bike, and I think that's a reasonable thing to think. But I don't believe that my son could live his life disconnected from social media. I just don't think it works that way. And the particular platforms are going to change. the particular kind of content that they share is going to change. But the reality is that if you're not a part of that environment now, you are kind of not a part of what social and cultural and societal life looks like. You have to be there. I think we need to get that. And I don't think we can work with youth until we get that fundamentally. I also think from my particular research perspective that the privacy issues associated with particularly corporate, but also in some cases government practices of harvesting, analyzing, sharing, storing data are becoming of increasing concern. The Facebook revelations most recently, just the least and the last of it. We've known these things have been going on for a very long time. There is nothing, absolutely nothing that was revealed that Frances O'Hagan, Haugen, and I can't remember her name right now. Anyway, that she revealed that surprised those of us who've been working in the area. There's no surprises at all. But what is surprising is the degree to which it's risen to the top of public consciousness. And I actually believe that, I believe, maybe I'm hopeful that now we're going to do something about corporate practices. I don't have absolute faith that that's the case, but I think we've got a better chance of doing it now than we've had for a very long time. I think it's a really good thing because I think that these data collection and the use of those data is they're creating really problematic social conditions and problematic realities, not just for youth, but for all of us right now.
You've both touched on so much, so interesting. The notion of the new types of jobs, Ahmed, I think is really interesting. You talk about fact checkers. I think, one of the things interesting, Jackie, when you bring up Frances Haugen, also, I've thought about this a lot in terms of, she made a comment that she's worked at Pinterest, she's worked at Facebook, she's been at all these different platforms, and that she'd like to do a tour of government. And if I have any optimism, because I, like you, was like, there's none of this is a surprise. Why is this so headline making? But if I have any optimism, it's that we have hit a sort of inflection point where you've got people who went into work in these companies who had passion about the fact that the potential of what these tools could do. And, the idea that it could make us better versions of ourselves or connect people in different ways. And then, have gotten quite demystified in the process by what they've seen, but that maybe now we'll have a new breed of people going into politics who have some of those skills, the inner workings, the technical knowledge, some of the critical thinking that's so important. And these are some of the skills where educators such as yourselves are so vital in the process. But it's not just fake news. I mean, there's so many different categories of quote unquote tech jobs that go beyond being able to build AI. And a lot of it is being able to keep that AI in check. A lot of it is, understanding where there's blind spots or gaps. One of the other big issues we've got is around the data void and the fact that, it's people who've got a particular agenda who are the ones filling up Instagram and all these platforms with content. And all of a sudden, if you're looking for good health related, or valid health related, health science information, valid political information, you may not find it there. So we need new breeds of content creators, the fact checkers, and all of these come down to essentially the critical skills. But, as Facebook is on everyone's mind, and you just brought it up, Jackie, one of the challenges that always comes up there is that it is a notorious black box, that it is a void that is very hard to get into. So this brings me to question 3, which is the challenges. What are the challenges and barriers when it comes to researching digital media literacy in Canada? Jackie, do you want to kick us off this time?
Sure. I think that Ahmed will have a lot of insight into this. I can say, from my perspective, the idea of the black box is really, really important. I've had for quite some time. So I've been interested in issues of privacy, but actually, I think for me, it's under a broader rubric of autonomy. And as someone, it's the longest chain, but as someone who's situated in the School of Information and Media Studies, I have been thinking a lot about the ways in which corporations are controlling our information environments. And I think it's quite powerful. You know, we become concerned about it in the context of the elections, and we can become concerned about it in the context of what Facebook is doing, and absolutely we should be, and it's everywhere. You know, your Google results are personalized. And where I'm going with this is that we've had I and the people I collaborate with have had a longstanding interest in this. We can't figure out how Google is personalizing your ads, or your, not just your ads, personalize your information. It's impossible to get a sense of, I just texted everybody, didn't. Oh, okay. Anyway, it's impossible to know what those algorithms are, how those algorithms are working. And there was something very interesting that I heard in the Facebook revelations, and it turned something on its head for me. So we know that Facebook collects a lot of profile information. We also know that Facebook tells us that they don't target ads on any protected grounds. And I think that on the face of it, that absolutely must be true. So that when a company comes and says, I want to target on, you know, race, they can't do it, but Facebook can target on other ways. But I realized in her testimony that actually that information about, so they know who is, Facebook knows who is clicking through on ads. They know lots of things about those people because of all the information we've revealed and the information they infer. And they're able to cycle around on the back end. And while they can't sell something to a company who wants only to advertise to someone who of a different racial background, let's say who's racialized, what they can do is give company feedback on, let's say, who's clicking through on their ads, and they know if those people are racialized. They may decide on their own, Facebook could decide to deliver the ads in a particular way. We don't know what their practices are. We have a little bit of insight into what the data are that are being collected. We have a little bit of insight into how those data are being used, but the biggest part of it is an absolute black box that's protected by, in some cases, by copyright or intellectual property, by really complicated legal and corporate structures that are almost impossible to disentangle. Like, we don't know. So I think that's the biggest, one of the biggest challenges is this black box. Can't get inside it.
Yep. Ahmed?
Thank you, Ramona. Thank you, Jacqueline. I totally agree regarding the black box of AI. And we are actually now trying to figure out a way to get some insight about the algorithmic framework of these platforms. So actually anyone can do it by doing simple reverse engineering practice, which is experimenting with words and hashtags and stuff and see what kind of reaction or results you will get from each platform. Let me give you an example. I'm looking at the way far-right figures in Canada are being promoted or described on Google autocomplete. So, you know, Google autocomplete is a feature that allows anyone to type something and immediately you get the results. So we were shocked, actually. I was like telling my team that, have a look at this. So if you type someone like Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorist, the description will be a radio host, very neutral, sometimes even positive. If you write the names of mass killers, the description will be sometimes even positive, like a performer or like a speaker or writer. And that's a very problematic thing in the algorithmic programming of Google. And, you know, I find this to be really interesting because the public discourses today are all about Facebook. I mean, I know Facebook sucks, we know that. But honestly, if you look at the online hate available on Twitter, you'll be shocked. I have seen most of the hate on Twitter and of course the other alternative social media. Google included here with the autocomplete and YouTube as well. But I see most of the blame is on Facebook. They deserve that blame. But I think we also should pay attention to the other bad players. We have really, really bad platforms that are very active in Canada, like BitChute for the far right. Of course, YouTube is very problematic, Telegram and so on. So it's important in the public discourse to talk about other platforms. I have a lot to say about social media data and problems, but I think Michelle, we miss Michelle, so I'll stop here. Thank you.
We're good on time. We want to hear you talk about the problems. That's why.
Oh, okay.
This is why people have tuned in.
Thank you. So when it comes to the other challenges we have, that's for the AI black box. But of course, in general, we have very limited access to data from social media. And I have been struggling actually to find enough data. It's just more recently, Twitter released what they call the API, which is an access point that allows researchers like me to get a full data access. But we don't know, for example, anything about the removed, deleted data. So it's just recently that we got that kind of access. And now we are able to go back in time and see what's happening in terms of trends and so on. The other problem is, of course, with the other platforms. Facebook does not allow access to its platform. It only gives you partial one. So CrowdTangle is a platform that Facebook offers researchers. I have been using it from the beginning, and it's just a joke, honestly. Like even I wrote about it because they just give you snippets of information, not the whole picture. And I had to find other ways, sometimes even finding some innovative ways to get the data from Instagram and elsewhere, because simply they don't want you to know what is happening. That's the reality. It seems that Twitter more recently has been pressured a lot to give full access, but for the other platforms, they don't want you to know, YouTube included, because again, for them, that's proprietary knowledge and they don't want any kind of public censure or blame on them. So for them, researchers like myself and others are probably a headache. They don't want them, but it's just like probably a necessary evil for them. And that's a reality. So we always try to find ways, innovative ways to get the data. Third, when we look at disinformation, we were really limited. So all in the beginning, I talked about what I found. It was actually from what Twitter publicly released. And that's the only thing I was able to examine. So Twitter released millions of tweets and other millions of multimedia data, which we were able to crunch and filter, but we don't know anything else because we are under the mercy of these social media platforms. Facebook, for example, during the 2016 election, only released 3,000 ads. And from these 3,000 ads in PDF format, to make it even harder for us to process, we were able to write a few papers and studies, but that's it. They don't tell you anything. They don't give you any details, so that we remain really very much in a dark spot, not knowing exactly the picture. Yeah, thank you.
Well, Michelle, welcome back. What we missed from you was how research in digital media has changed over the past several years, although I do think it's a natural lead into the challenges that have emerged in recent years. So maybe you can touch on the two, but I think there's a lot of connections that are there.
There really, really are. So first of all, parenthesis, I'm so sorry. There was a fire alarm, but I found a little corner in another building. So here we are. I'm back. You gotta be flexible when you're an educator anyway, right? So this is it. So as I entered back into the conversation, I listened to what Jacky and Ahmed were saying. I kind of felt like, yeah, so that's why it's so hard for teachers to teach digital literacies, right? And so fundamentally, this is actually one of the core issues in digital literacies research in an educational context, because the context of our work continually changes, and it's very difficult to sort of nail down, as colleagues have said here, exactly what the system is doing. And without that information and without a deep understanding of how the systems are working, as educators charged with the challenge of teaching children at different levels of sort of development how to use digital tools and digital systems to make meaning, how to create digital texts, how to participate ethically and responsibly and safely in these spaces. it is an incredible challenge. And so in some ways, digital literacies research, sort of from an educational perspective anyway, has kind of for a long time worked to describe, right? Like we've been describing what's been happening, but the descriptions continue to evolve as the internet or these digital technologies continue to evolve. And from an educational perspective, it's just so very difficult to get a handle on what it is that we're studying, because it's always changing. And Don Liu, a long time ago in 2000, talked about the deictic nature of meaning making, because what is now, was yesterday, and tomorrow will mean something entirely different. And so there's this, real shift. And that's very, very difficult for us to get a handle on. So I think that continues to be a significant challenge for all of the reasons that Jackie and Ahmed have sort of articulated, because we're not able to know necessarily how the systems are working. And I would also say that like the research in digital literacies, again, from an educational perspective, has certainly evolved as we've come to understand that so much of what we're thinking about has been black box. So I think now there is a deep, deep focus on the critical and really trying to prepare children and teens and young adults with those critical dispositions that they need to sort of unpack what it is that they're interacting with when they're in a digital space. So I think that continues to be a real focus in our work. And I think, this is maybe going to sound like, well, of course, at this moment, but I think we've also come to realize that young people need a lot more intentional support and instruction to manage the complexities of what it is that they're interacting with on the daily, right? In all of the spaces and for all of the purposes that they use digital technologies. And truly, I think in education for a long time, we're very aware of how kids are using digital tools, digital media, digital platforms outside of school, right? But then there's been a huge question around, well, like they're doing it outside of school. Do we really need to integrate it in school? And because so much of these technologies have been black boxed and we're not able to understand them, it's really, really difficult to get a handle on what digital literacies mean, right? What are they? What is that we're trying to instruct? And so, researchers are also kind of grappling with this, like what do these variables really mean if they're always changing, and how do we develop curriculum expectations around these issues, around these variables? How do we teach these things? And the more complex the systems become, the more muddied it seems the definitions become too. And it really disempowers, I think, educators and researchers in some ways without access to real, information that can help us to teach children how to manage, if that makes any sense. So lots of connections there. I'll stop. I don't know if others have comments.
So this leads us to what's next for all of this, right? What's next for digital media literacy research in Canada? I'd almost like to start with a very personal, what do you need, or what is the next generation of researchers that comes wanting to work with you and under you, what other than access, transparency, and openness? Sorry if I answer the question. You can just let me know if we should move on to the next one, but what is next? And, I'd love to hear your suggestions and ideas in terms of, anything from necessary partnerships and collaborations, but also what's needed to really rigorously push things forward at this moment, given the challenges. Why don't we start with Michelle, since you're back now?
Thank you. Thanks, Ramona. Well, I think for one, as a research community, we've recognized that we really need to center, in addition to the things that you mentioned, Ramona, absolutely, openness, transparency, but I think that we've also recognized that we need to center the voices, the interests, the practices of students and teachers. And we need to sort of go deeply in an educational context anyway, into their experiences. We need for our work to include what my colleague Kristen Hebert has called ethical reciprocity. As researchers, I think we're really acutely aware of the need to serve the communities in which our digital literacies and media literacies work is happening. And so in terms of moving ahead, it means that we're thinking a lot more now about how do we embrace complexity? How do we capture complexity? How do we make sense of that complexity so that what emerges next in the field of digital literacies is much more situated in the lives and the experiences and the needs and the interests of the communities that we seek to serve. So I think that's very, very important. I guess a second point, so I'm a member of a research collaboratory at the University of Ottawa called SHANEEN, which stands for Change, Engagement, and Innovation in Education. And my colleague, Joel Westheimer, and I recently wrote a report that was included in a Royal Society of Canada working report on COVID in schools. And we certainly advocated, and I mean, we're not the only ones who have done that, but we certainly advocated for the development of a national roundtable on digital literacies that would really enable us to develop a truly Canadian digital literacies definition, frameworks that reflect the current understandings that we have of the racial, linguistic, cultural, geographic diversities of the Canadian communities and schools in which we're doing this work. And I would obviously, as an educational researcher, like for that roundtable to include teacher voices, student voices, parent voices, community voices. So I think that that's a really important, and I know Media Smarts has actually called for something similar. So I do think that we're at a moment now, especially having come through this COVID time, where the digital is so present in people's minds. And I think as a research community, and we really need to be a part of convening a broader national conversation about what digital literacies are and mean for us.
Yes, thank you so much. You brought up so much that's interesting, some of which, if we have time, I'd like to circle back on. But Ahmed, maybe you can touch on where you see things headed, what's next, your suggestions, what you think.
Thank you, Ramona. Thanks, Michelle. These are really excellent points you mentioned. I just want to add, maybe when it comes to digital media literacy, in my mind, I avoid making it like a normative practice, which means there is one way of doing it, there is one right, and there is another wrong way of doing it. Because, education is a collaborative process, similar to what Michelle just mentioned. Having the learner in mind is very important. What we need to do as educators is to show them what is there and let the learner have an informed decision. It's similar to democracy, because they have to have agency in deciding what is right and what is wrong, what works for them and what does not work for them. Especially because today we have a lot of emerging new technologies, like we cannot cope with these technologies. Talking about mobile apps, if you just check how many mobile apps are there on your phone, you will be shocked to see that there are tens of thousands of them, and we don't have time and effort and the resources to go through each one of them and educate people about them. So what we need to do instead is to prepare people to have some what we call defensive mechanisms, awareness strategies, so that they can be protected when they get exposed, and they will be exposed to bad content and bad apps. So that's what we need to do, to make them reach this kind of informed decision stage where they can go on and proceed. I'm saying this because we are actually facing real challenges, not only in Canada, but around the world when it comes to the weaponization of information. Today, especially young people are sometimes engaged with really risky things, risky issues. Sometimes it could be an emoji. You might laugh, it's an emoji, but I can assure you that some of these emojis contain a lot of hate. And I have actually written a couple of papers showing how genocide is actually expressed with the use of emojis. You can actually express genocide, your desire to kill people, with emojis. So some people might be playing with these emojis, but they are really dangerous stuff. Another image like Pepe the Frog, which is used by the far right. It's a symbol of hate, but sometimes I see kids, sometimes they use this image as their avatar when they play video games, thinking it's just a fun thing, but it's actually just promoting that that hateful ideology, very anti-Semitic, very xenophobic. So that's the problem today we have. A lot of the information is weaponized. That's where we need digital media literacy. We educate people, listen, this is the problem, don't engage with this, and let them make that decision. We cannot dictate, of course, we cannot brainwash, we cannot force people to think in certain ways, but our job is to educate them and let them have that decision. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Jackie?
I agree with everything that's been said up to this point. And in fact, those are probably key issues I was going to raise. And so I think what I'll do is I'll raise one more, which is that as researchers, increasingly, and educators, increasingly, we must follow as much as we lead. And by that, I mean, okay, I'm old enough to know that I'm absolutely clueless about what my son is doing on his phone, but I'm not alone. And the truth is that, especially among youth, the use of the media is changing so fast that we are not the experts and can never be the experts, because unless you're embedded in it, you're not going to know what's going on. So we find out about the frog, for example, and Ahmed, I'm pointing at you, and I think I've heard that before. We find out about that, but we need to know that we're way behind. So we need to understand how to engage users, except I think I need a better word than that, really actively, not just as informants, but as participants in understanding this new media environment. And again, I focus on youth because that's where a lot of my work is, and quite frankly, because I think that's where a lot of the big, quick technical and technological changes in use and use patterns are happening. But I don't think it's the only group. I think that there are certainly sociocultural differences. The use of technology is very different in Asia. I know they're using different technologies in different ways than we are using here. So to understand from inside the communities and cultures that we want to think with, work with, strive to assist to navigate this environment, to understand the world from inside is really important. And that's a big challenge.
You've all raised such interesting points, and something that you've mostly all touched on also. Jackie, you're talking about this, who we engage and this critical need to actively engage youth in these discussions. Michelle, you touched on diversity and representation as well. So that's another question I have for everybody is, how can we increase diversity and representation in the fields in terms of the voices so that it's not a homogenous group of researchers looking at what other people are doing in this space? Anyone want to volunteer to go first for this one? Ahmed, thank you.
Yes, Romana, I think we can do it in many ways. For example, if you're running a research team, you can invite or recruit people from different backgrounds, like sexual and gender minorities, ethnic and racial groups, different members, because each member will bring in a unique insight and provide very important feedback that would enrich the whole process. And that's what we need. We need a better understanding of what is going on around us. So we need to diversify and move forward. Yeah, I think that's what I'm personally doing in different ways. But of course, we need more effort when it comes to this. Thank you.
Michelle?
I think there's a couple of things. Methodologically, I think as researchers, we can really critically question, right, the epistemological sort of assumptions that are framing the methods that we are using. So I think that, more and more positions in universities and more scholarship is always sort of emerging. But I think if we maybe go slow and truly center the voices, the experiences of the communities that we seek to serve, and those methods are co-constructed, let's say, with participants who are often marginalized, right, from dominant discourses and ways of working, there's a lot of potential there, I think, to increase and diversify the understandings that we develop as a field. Again, getting back to that notion of ethical reciprocity, right? Like starting with that. And I agree with Ahmed. I mean, I think that our research teams, I mean, must absolutely include more representation of you know, all of the beautiful humanity, right, that exists in the schools that, you know, our research is situated in, right? So that's really very important. And I mean, I'll just put in a plug for, you know, continued and increased funding, right, from those who fund doctoral study, master's level study. You know, if we want people, if we want to attract people, right, into this field, then we have to fund them, and we have to fund them sufficiently so that they can live, support their families while engaging in this really critical knowledge work.
Yeah, absolutely. Jackie, do you want to chime in?
I was going to say that these are challenges that we face within this field, but also across institutions in general, and the challenges of ensuring that we're recognizing and addressing barriers to participation by members of equity deserving groups, and also thinking about the whole decolonization of the institution. It's hard work. I find it's challenging, and I think it's as challenging here as it is in the institution as a whole. There's no dividing line there.
Ahmed, did you have something else you wanted to add?
I mentioned it, but it's just like I'm thinking of the newcomers to Canada. They need probably a lot of things, as well as refugees, asylum seekers, and new immigrants. So I think there needs to be more focus on these communities, and reflecting really well on how to better serve them with digital media literacies. I think this will serve everyone, because these communities will become integrated very soon within the broader Canadian society, and they will be very important, you know, factors in enriching the whole country. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking forward to what the landscape is like in a decade, when people who have studied with you are working in policy in so many different fields, where it's not sort of digital media as a slice, but really thinking about what this means for newcomers and health and all these different areas, because it touches on all of these different areas. This has been such a wonderful discussion. I can't keep all the questions to myself, so I know people who are attending would like to ask some questions as well. And I think Samantha is on deck to hear from everyone in the audience. Thank you so much, the three of you. This has been wonderful. I could talk to you for hours. I hope we get to continue to, but for now, let's hear from everyone who's been listening.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha Mackley. I'm a research associate here at Media Smarts. And yeah, I agree with Ramona. I could keep sitting here listening to all of you talk about your work and your thoughts about researching digital media literacy in Canada. I think I completely filled a notebook with notes as you were all talking. So thank you all so much. And yeah, I just want to give an opportunity for everyone who's here. Yeah, if you have questions for the speakers, please feel free to pop them in the chat, or if you feel comfortable kind of raising your hand and asking with your audio or camera on, your choice. But yeah, we do have some time right now to take a few questions. And I see Robert right away with his hand up. So I will toss it over to you, Robert. Oh, we're not hearing you.
How's that, any better?
How's that? Okay. Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah. Hi. I'm just interested in feedback from the group on an amazing discussion. I filled 3 pages of a Word document of notes, but so I'm in the media studies department at the New School, and I'm working on a project now where I'm doing some research, and my interest is disinformation and media literacy and so forth, on using meta awareness and actually mindfulness skills for students to help them avoid being triggered as a potential solution. And I'm wondering if you feel that this is the kind of thing that could be one of those dispositions that could be applied to any media at any time, helping with one of the challenges where it's something that could be sustainable even throughout somebody's life if they can apply it and help with some of these challenges.
Michelle, I think Michelle wants to answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what a great line of work, Robert. Thanks so much for sharing that. So early career stuff that I worked on, and I'm kind of circling back to it in collaboration with a colleague in Finland, Karita Kiwi, focused on how to teach students to construct meaning while they're conducting internet search and how to synthesize their understandings. And, one of the insights that emerged for me from that work, and certainly it's reflected in the work of others, is in fact, well, first of all, we know that what people already know, right, about a topic is likely to influence what it is that they take away. But there needs to be some kind of mechanism, as you're identifying, Robert, in your work, to help them stop to critically question, right, how it is that they're going to enter into that information gathering process or that search process, so that they can be aware, critically aware of maybe, just like you're saying, some of the triggers, right, might be for them. So it deserves a lot more work, but I certainly think that anything that we can do to help students become aware of the emotional valences, right, that are in play, help them to understand that when our amygdala, right, is involved, when that limbic system is involved, that their capacity to think critically will likely be compromised, right? Big feelings mean not a lot of like rational thinking, right? And so just even entering in to a search process with that awareness, right, part of the process, I think is likely to lead to a lot of important insights about how we could teach kids, young people, to manage their information search activities. So yes. I think it's a promising direction.
I actually agree. I think it's a really interesting and valuable avenue of research. And I will add, from the perspective of a cognitive psychologist, a bit of not a caution. I think it's important. And I think that it is meaningful for all of the reasons that Michelle is identifying here. And let's not be naive. The techniques that and strategies that are used to manipulate us, these companies are very, 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 very smart about what they're doing. And I can look at, I look at what I know about what they're doing, and I recognize that what they're doing is they're capitalizing on a lot of unconscious biases in the ways in which we reason. And so, there's a long history of research in behavioral decision-making that includes attempts to try and teach people out of operating with these unconscious biases or these heuristics or strategies. And often it fails. And Robert, that's not to say that the endeavor that you're embarked on is not useful. For all the reasons that Michelle has outlined, I think it's very useful. But I also think that we have to look at regulating what corporations are doing, because some of it we can't fix just by thinking.
And Ahmed, did you want to add to the discussion here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm honestly, personally, not very concerned about being triggered. We get triggered every single day when I drive my car everywhere, sometimes even inside your home. The point about being triggered could be, I mean, I think Robert is focusing on the negative aspect of being triggered, because sometimes being positively triggered is good. Like, for example, if there is an NGO calling for action about climate change, or protection of animals, and we need people to get triggered. We need people to be affected so that they can take moral action and correct the wrong thing. So it's part also of our nature. But being triggered unconsciously or impulsively might not be good, especially when it comes, for example, to trolling, online shaming, bullying people, that will be definitely not good, and that should be maintained or contained in a way. But again, I'm for the word triggered, it could be both ways in my mind. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to take a question from the chat. So we've got a question from Linda, who wants to know if anyone is aware of any recent studies about social media and newcomers to Canada, especially with respect to privacy, security, and disinformation. So there's some work being done at Red River College. They're working on digital literacy for newcomers, but they'd like to see some more and want to know if any of you have any more information about research in a specific area.
I did work with the New Canadian Media. It's an initiative to serve immigrants coming to Canada, and they held different workshops, and they focus on Canadian ethnic media. And I know that they have run certain surveys or work with the newcomers. So they have an excellent website, and you can find probably some resources there. Thank you.
Are there any other suggestions from Michelle or Jackie?
I know we've been doing a little bit of work with the Equality Project with new immigrants, but that actually was one of the many things that one would say, and then COVID, because it got held up because of that side. And I'm not aware of any other work.
You know, I mean, I can give a shout. It's not focused specifically on social media. I can certainly give a shout out to my doctoral student, Seema Nasiri, who is focused also on studying digital literacies for newcomer English language learners in classroom contexts. And so she's sort of an emerging researcher who's also interested in the digital literacies learning of newcomers. But I can point to one article by Gallagher, De Cesare, and Jennifer Rousel that focused specifically on the experiences of newcomer Canadians and sort of the digital literacies needs. So I believe that was published in the Reading Teacher. So I can grab the citation and I can pop it in the chat in a second here. So that's one article that I know that might be of value.
Oh, and Ahmed, yep.
I'm sorry. I just want to highlight that this remains a very under-researched topic. So we need a lot of more research to understand what is happening, because as I said, they play a very important role in our society. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ahmed. Okay, I'm going to keep working through some of the questions in the chat here. And the next one is kind of a question that I wanted to ask as well. So maybe geared towards if there's any kind of, grad students in the audience or early career researchers who are trying to, maybe dig in a bit deeper to digital media literacy research, but maybe they're coming from a different area of research and this is all new to them. So maybe some advice that some of you would give to, either, later year undergrad students or graduate students, PhD students, on how to, kind of find their way in this field, and maybe some key questions they should start asking, or maybe some new interesting methods to dig into, or what kind of be your go-to advice for new researchers in this field. I know it's an easy question.
Well, one of the things that I'd say is, when I came into the school, into the Faculty of Information and Media Studies, I came in as a psychologist, cognitive psychologist, but I had pretty strong background in tech, and I was actually mostly a computer science student as well. And it served me very well. And I think I was struck by the attitude that I encountered when I came into the school, because basically people said, well, what do you need to know about technology? And I'm going, yeah, you really need to know about technology. And I think there's a truth to that still. Even the technologies are getting more and more complicated. I haven't coded a line in decades, but I do see it as my responsibility. If I want to talk about a technology, I need to have some basic understanding of it. I need to know how it works, and I need to engage with the technology. And this is, I think, particularly important for those of us who want to take a critical perspective, and many of us do, and there's many very good reasons to do that. think if you're going to take a critical perspective on something, you need to have sat with it for a bit and really not just thought about it, but actually, touched it.
Yeah, Ahmed.
So Samantha, the question is about the learners or for the educators?
I think from the question in the chat, this is someone about, about the researchers, so someone who's, maybe like new to research in this area. So, grad students. Yeah.
I think this is, I think this is a very interdisciplinary, you needed an interdisciplinary approach to move forward. So similar to what Jacqueline mentioned, computer science is important, but even literature is important sometimes. You need imagination, you need some kind of background in ethics. I think and education, it's interdisciplinary. We need knowledge from different parts. I found when it comes to hands-on experience and practical tips, I found a course I took with the Knights Foundation. It's free of charge for investigative journalists. Really useful. Honestly, one of the best I have seen, because they tell you exactly how you can fact check information. How can you make sure that an image is not manipulated? And it's free of charge. I can actually send you the link if you want. It took me maybe a couple of weeks to finish it because it's not that difficult, but very useful if you want hands-on information. But in general, curiosity should be a very important thing. And of course, rely on credible sources and check the consensus about these credible sources. Is there consensus? So talking about climate change, not all the scientists on climate change agree that it's man-made. There is like very, very few scientists who say, well, probably this is a natural cycle. But what we need to do is follow consensus, that the majority agree that it's man-made. That's what we need to do as well. Similar to fact checkers, they need to follow consensus about many issues. And of course, use their reason and follow an interdisciplinary approach. Thank you.
Jackie or Michelle, did you want to chime in on that one? Or I can move on to the next question. All right, yeah, because we've got a few more here. So another question from Linda. So has there been a lot of research yet on the impact of TikTok's For You page algorithm and far right or alt-right ideologies? So yeah, does anyone know of any kind of current research on TikTok being, a newer platform?
I'll just say this much. No, I don't know of anything, and we're always playing catch up. So.
Yeah, great point. I think it speaks to a lot of what you all were saying throughout. What that especially with this field, everything is always already changing. So yeah, there's a bit of a lag, of course. Ahmed, I think I saw you jump up there.
I'm actually doing a study now on the journalists' use of TikTok. So I'm almost done working on that. And you can say I'm a bit familiar with it. The bad actors, yes, they are available. And it takes TikTok some time to delete that kind of content. So for example, the hashtag QAnon was there, but then it got removed or limited. But sometimes they seep in, like they use other hashtags like Kikistanis, which is a well-known word used by the far right to spread hate. And they sometimes use images or misinformation about the pandemic, for instance. But I've noticed that TikTok is actually like really fast in removing the content. But it's still there. They can still exploit that kind of content. And it's an emerging technology and very appealing to young people. Thank you.
I think there's another question in chat that kind of jumps off this. Someone wanting to know, either, what percentage or how much of, the hate that we're seeing, either online or offline, how much of this can we kind of contribute to kind of new digital media? I know that's another tough question to ask, but or answer. But I guess maybe commenting again on the very real impacts of these platforms on people's experiences of hate, both on and offline.
I think answering the how much question is really, really difficult, but I do think we know quite a bit about the way in which hate and hate speech and aggression are amplified in the online context. Very early on, we were talking about disinhibition effects. The fact that I think interacting through this wee screen leaves us acting differently than we might in face-to-face interactions. I think there's been a lot of discussion with that over the years, but I think there's some fundamental truth that remains there, which is we will do things to other people and in relation to other people when communicating with them and they're not in the room that we would never do, or we would be reluctant to do if we were actually face-to-face. And the amplification effects of online communication on this kind of negative interaction are well established. And I think, you know, there may also be amplification of positive interactions. But yeah, it's both.
I mean, I really can't address sort of the percentage question, the percentage sort of valence to that question, but just sort of building on what Jackie was saying. I mean, I certainly have seen, I guess it kind of goes back to like what's changed about digital literacies research sort of in my field. And I would say that I work a lot with pre-service teacher candidates, right? And one of the projects that our pre-service teacher candidates do at our faculty is they curate a digital portfolio that they share with the world as they're becoming professional educators. And, you know, Jackie's comments really kind of evoked an insight that I think as a faculty we're coming to understand. Again, outside of school, outside of classroom contexts, our pre-service teacher candidates have very rich digital lives. But of course, and it's also important to mention that many of them are young women, and many of them have certainly observed or been targets of, right, hateful activities in the social media spaces that they occupy. And it feels actually very risky for them sometimes to put themselves out there as they're becoming something that they've never been before, a professional educator in a digital space. And so, I mean, this is sort of a, you know, almost like a sideline, but I think that we need really a lot more research sort of focused on the impacts, right, that of this kind of activity on the young people who have decided to commit themselves to lives as educators, and what that ultimately means in terms of the choices they make about how they teach digital literacies in classrooms, how comfortable they feel in these spaces as educators, how they do and do not like use their voices in spaces where they could actually be advocating for community interests and community needs. But maybe there is this, you know, sort of little hesitancy because of the kinds of hateful activity that they've observed. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as another valence in the work, you know?
Yeah, super interesting and important points. Thanks, Michelle. And Ahmed, I see your hand up there.
I mean, no one has quantified hate on different social media platforms. It's almost impossible because we, as I said in the beginning, we don't have full access to these platforms. So we don't know the full pictures. But in general, from the anecdotal evidence that we have so far, alternative social media platforms like Telegram, Discord, BitChute have far more hate than the mainstream social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. They have far more hate. When I looked at, for instance, the way the far right uses Telegram, I was actually shocked. I felt very pessimistic about humanity because, it was filled with hate. Like I was actually searching for only neutral or positive messages instead of the bad content. So that's Telegram. I'm sorry to say that.
No, and I think you're highlighting too the difficulty of doing this research sometimes, and the harms that researchers can experience when you're digging into this content, and how it can sometimes be really rough to be engaging with that content every day too, when it's your work to do so. Ramona, I'm going to put it back to you because I know you had some questions that you wanted to ask. We do have a couple minutes if you did want to circle back to anything during your discussion.
I mean, there are a lot of great questions that are still in the chat. One of them that sticks with me that I feel like other people probably want to know too, Ahmed, when you were talking about the barriers or limitations to getting access to the data sets at some of these different platforms, you started talking about some of the workarounds that you came up with, some of the tools that you have used yourself in sort of broad senses. Can you talk a little bit about how you have gained insights when the companies don't want you getting them?
Yeah, I can give you an example. So I wanted to study the way drugs, we have a problem in BC with drugs. It's the opioid crisis. It's a big problem we are facing. So I wanted to see how, for example, one drug like specific types of drugs, let's say specific types of drugs, and their hashtags are being used on Instagram. With CrowdTangle, I was not able to do so, but I used a Python. It's a program called Python. And with that program, there are scripts that you can use to get the data that you want. And this way you will bypass the limitations that this social media company has enacted. And I was able to get the data that I needed, and I published my study. But that's something probably the social media company does not want me to do, because it's not in their interest for me to do so. Another problem we have, for example, when it comes to Facebook comments, we can't get them anymore. Facebook claimed that it's because of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and we stopped that. So there is now one webometric tool that is available for programmers that will enable you to get just like maybe 10% of the comments on a Facebook page. The problem in all of this is that you really need to learn how to program these stuff. It took me 6 months, I think, to figure out how to run a few things, and I'm still learning. So that's what some of the challenges of doing research. Like my area, like my background is in traditional media research. So, but I ended up in computer science research. This is what Jacqueline just mentioned. That's why we need interdisciplinary approaches, so that we can bring in different ways to study digital media, which is not really easy. And not, by the way, not even mentioning big data. So to give you one example, on Twitter, on the Twitter disinformation campaigns, I wanted to understand how the foreign trolls targeted Canada using the multimedia images. I couldn't, because the data contained about 10 terabytes. Like, you know, that's 1,000 gigabytes. So I had to use CDAR, which is Canada's supercomputer. In this way, I can store the data there, process it, and get what I need. But you cannot imagine how many months it passed and how many people I consulted and programmers I talked to get that kind of data. It's super hard. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Good insights. And if I can just underscore also what you've said there about interdisciplinarity, it's been touched on earlier in this conversation in terms of diversity of views and perspectives. And I think the international is a piece too for some of the younger students, just the discovery that though these platforms are so global and powerful, that, you know, in Seoul, they may not be the dominant platforms that their peers are using, is just in and of itself something that I think shapes people's understanding of all of this in a really important way as well. So however we can get different perspectives, be it through backgrounds and skills or perspective and lived experience, is really important in all of this as well. As I've said, you know, I could keep gushing, but I'll hand it over to Kara. Thank you for everyone's questions from the audience as well. Those were great questions. And thank you to the panelists.
Great, thanks, Ramona. Just before we wrap up, just a couple of comments from us at Media Smarts, just based on the conversation we've had today. It's just been a fantastic conversation. First, there's been some discussion and some questions around misinformation and verifying information. So my colleagues here at Media Smarts are going to put in the chat Media Smarts, link to Media Smarts Break the Fake program. This program teaches 4 quick and easy steps for verifying information. So for anybody who is interested in learning a little bit more about that themselves and or sharing that with others, whether it's family, friends, or in an educational context, you can find that link there and do a bit more exploring yourself. There was a question as well about whether or not there are nonprofits working on adult digital media literacy. I think this is another incredible challenge and gap in Canada. We certainly have, as most of us have pointed out, and ourselves at Media Smarts too for a while, our focus has been on youth, and I think it remains there for good reason, as some of the speakers, Jackie and others, have pointed out. There are organizations that work, and focus on adult literacy, less so around digital literacy, and there are also organizations that are focusing specifically on seniors. I think adults remain a gap that we need to figure out how we are going to address. And then that brings me to our sort of the final comment that I'll make from Media Smarts is that, and linked to some of the other comments we're seeing here about digital literacy benchmarks and or competencies. And I know Michelle mentioned it earlier, but it is something that we are working on and currently have a project funded by Heritage, in which we will work with a broad range of sectors on creating a draft of what a national digital media literacy strategy will look like for Canada. So it's been our goal and continues to be to build leadership in this area around, creating a strategy with hopefully some of those benchmarks. So please, stay tuned for that work. Finally, and most importantly, a great big thank you to Ramona, to Ahmed, to Jackie, and to Michelle. Big virtual rounds of applause. We don't get to do the same ruckus applause that we would if we were in person, but know that we are clapping here for you. And I would ask folks if you have the time, we've also put a link to a post-event survey, so you could give us some feedback. That would be helpful. And I'll invite you, if you'd like, to stay and chat with those of us here at Media Smarts. We'll stick on the call for a little bit to allow for some time to get to know some of you if you might be interested in that, or do a bit of networking. I know that can be tricky in a digital context. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, a big thank you to our panelists and to our chair. And we look forward to hopefully doing this again in the future. So thanks very much.